Dear reader, allow me to transport you to a realm of antiquity so outlandishly enchanted that even the unicorns roll their eyes in disbelief. The land of Fantasia, where the laws of nature are not much more than a helpful suggestion. Its geography unfolding like a disquieting dream. Behold the unnecessarily sharp mountains, whose peaks, one suspects, were painstakingly sculpted by obsessive giants rather than the relentless forces of geology. The rolling uplands and secret vales, matted with dense woodland and thickets, like some unexplored regions of a new and hirsute acquaintance. The fertile plains, where the grass is greener than a leprechaun's envy. Observe the bustling towns and squalid villages, with their merchants, artisans, and the downtrodden peasantry. All a sprawling stage for the theatre of the bizarre. The inhabitants, depending on one's disposition, are either the stuff of sheer whimsy or intoxicated delirium, a bit like Narnia, but not written by a devout Christian. Castle Lahnstein, now a melancholy relic atop a desolate crag, the once proud towers weather-worn and leaning with the world-weariness of a faded aristocrat. Turrets that seem to defy gravity more out of sheer insolence than any structural rationale, crumble with the graceful inevitability of a Shakespearean tragedy. It is from this dilapidated edifice I, Lord Andrayus Lahnstein, rule the citizen creatures of the lands below me. Due to inheritance, tradition, the occasional improvised black magic scourge, and good old-fashioned terror, I am, after all, a werewolf, and as such could theoretically crush a horse's skull in my jaws. Fortunately, no one's ever asked me to demonstrate that I can actually fit a horse's head in my mouth. Well, not its head, at any rate. Oh, reckless youth! I was quite the dashing dandy and wolf about town and village when my official portrait was painted 30 years ago. I recall those heady days with a wry smile. My dearest diary, as I emerge from my stupor amidst the faded grandeur of this lordly bedchamber, I cannot help but marvel at the uncanny ability of the morning sun to pierce through even the thickest of my hangover-induced fogs. The linen seems unusually starched, presumably from some previous indulgence. I rise from my bed and am greeted by the tortured groans of floorboards that serenade every nocturnal expedition to the commode. Now the dilemma of dressing ensues. Selecting garments is a treacherous task. Velvet that looks more like mange, and lace that could do with a good boiling in salt water. It's a costume party in the saddest sense, where the theme is reanimated corpse. Descending the grand staircase, I collide with the balustrade, much to the amusement of the servants, who made no haste in attending to my state of chagrin. I requested a restorative morning brandy, but was instead presented with a goblet of what I assumed to be milk. However, its aroma suggested its source may have been partaking in illicit affairs with a goat. The servants, oh, the servants, a troop of misfits who make incompetence an art form. It seems their primary training involved a crash course in how to spill wine and leave thumbprints on the plates. I settle into my chair in the dining hall, the remnants of last night's entertainments still lying about like unwelcome guests. Lately, empty glasses and forlorn bottles have taken on a certain permanence at the table. The cook finally appears, a porcine figure whose girth seems to suggest he treats the pantry as if it were his private banquet, accompanied by a kitchen goblin whose grooming regimen could be charitably described as non-existent. They arrive, bearing what is announced as my lord's breakfast. The repast laid out before me is a feast fit for a pauper. The bread is as stale as my wit after a night of excess. The cook, with his penchant for overcooking, insists that the blackened exterior of the bacon is how I like it, but I beg to differ. My lord, the cook wheezes, dabbing his forehead with what I dearly hope is a napkin. We endeavoured to provide only the finest. The goblin behind him, emboldened by some mischief of his own making, grins in a manner that suggests he has deposited an additional ingredient into my meal. They both bow and leave me. I crunch the splintering shards of bacon, then take a sip of tea, which, no doubt, has been sitting in the pot for far too long. It does nothing to soothe my hangover, though it does an admirable job of stripping the enamel from my teeth. I set the cup down with the careful precision of someone who has just realized that they may, in fact, be poisoned, but is too tired to care. Leaning back in my chair, I contemplate the long and arduous day ahead. I may consider a brief constitutional, perhaps as far as the window, where I can gaze out upon the predictably inclement weather outside. After that, the possibilities are endless. I could, for instance, read a book. Writing a letter is another option. But who, I ask, would be thrilled to receive a correspondence that is equal parts illegible and deeply insulting? Perhaps I shall spend the morning engaged in a serious contemplation of my past mistakes. Yes, that seems productive. By lunchtime, I will, no doubt, have reached the stage of philosophical enlightenment, where everything seems terribly unfair, and yet somehow entirely my fault. So far, the day is starting to shape up quite nicely. Dear Diary, seeing the rain-soaked hills from my window, moist-eyed, I recall the energetic days of my earlier life. I was an enthusiastic horse-wolf and hunter. Whatever the weather, I'd be out galloping across my estate. It was my way of mixing business with pleasure, as the route would take me past the various peasant farms who were lucky enough to be selected for an administrative visit. No, I knew full well they hated it. My sudden arrival in the lane would send some muscular farm labourer running to the house to inform his master that his master had been seen approaching, and at some speed, giving the occupants a few precious minutes to hide the good crockery and any unfortunate pheasants they might have snared in my woods. They were never pleased to see me, although they always bowed and clenched a curl-lipped smile. I usually found myself invited into some filthy kitchen, with that ever-present smell of boiled cabbage and damp wool that hovels Excellion. I'd sit scowling at the occupants as we discussed crop yields, stem weevils, and poor weather. The smart ones knew my charitable disposition was inextricably linked to the quality of the beer they offered, out of politeness. A generous helping of cured meat, or a quarter-plus slice of recently baked pork pie was also a shrewd move on their part. If later I staggered back to my horse feeling nicely replete, I'd belch some non-committal mumble about being sure tithe payments would be forthcoming after the harvest before going on my way. On the occasions I left with the added burden of a sack with a chicken in it, I didn't refer to the subject of taxes at all. I'm not a monster.
Dear Diary, let me tell you, in my prime I had quite a reputation as a master of the dark arts. My library on the subject is still the envy of many an apprentice necromancer. Antique volumes referencing every ancient spirit of creation and of destruction, and how to command their service. Useful when disgruntled townsfolk start planning some riot or impoverished peasants are late with tithe payments. If required, I could summon up some very persuasive-looking demons from the pages of those books. But alas, the price of such indulgences can be high indeed. Wrangling the chaotic forces of the cosmos can sap one's vital fluids, and I no longer have the energy. But I don't let the riffraff know that. All I can muster these days is the occasional after-dinner sparkly light show to entertain guests. I still have the robes. Somewhere. Dear Diary, in the lawless hamlet of Ferrol Bridge there exists a tavern of singular notoriety, the Full Moon. Shrouded in scandal, this infamous molly house and inn is the pulsating supernatural heart of the county.
Its entrance in an obscure alleyway requires a knowing wink and well-chosen attire to cross over the threshold.
Once within, the atmosphere is a tantalizing fusion of enchantment and carnal curiosity. Its walls adorned with tapestries depicting the most salacious scenes of mythical creatures. The clientele, a licentious medley of supernatural beings, including flirtatious fairies, lustful incubi and succubi with devilishly tempting smiles. And of course, the lupine Lotharios, the ravenous wolves. There is even a widened back entrance to the beer hall for any centaur clientele, well known as they are for their disconcerting girth. Whatever the crowd, the air always heavy with lust and mischief. The barkeep, a disreputable satyr named Thaddeus Synthrob, infamous for mixing elixirs of desire that leave patrons both enchanted and unabashedly eager. His attire so scandalously risque that it could make even the most daring of harpies blush. The tavern's signature libation, the Moonlight Frenzy, a potent blend of forbidden fruit liqueur, siren tears, and more than a pinch of powdered unicorn horn. Patrons revel in this forbidden elixir, and later, in the dimly lit back rooms, desires roar louder than a proverbial dark and stormy night. On occasion, I myself have been known to frequent this fine watering hole, availing myself for an advance fee, one of the small but adequately furnished bed-chambers on the upper levels, in which to entertain old friends, new acquaintances, or simply sleep off the excesses of the evening. Riding home the following morning, in the confidence I wouldn't slip from my saddle in the dark into some muddy ditch. At times, I was such a regular customer, the best room in the house was always ready, equipped for my eccentric appetites.